A black woman steps onto a private jet. Calm and quiet. She doesn't wear designer brands or act like a big deal, but when a male flight attendant sees her, he assumes she's in the wrong seat, or worse, doesn't belong at all. What follows is a moment of public shame, until the truth comes out. The flight attendant's voice was getting louder. This section is reserved for elite guests. You need to move. Maya Carter didn't flinch. She looked up from her seat in the front row, calm and steady. "This is my seat," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't rude, it wasn't loud, but it was clear, and that only seemed to make the man angrier. He stood tall, arms crossed, his name tag reading Rick. In his late 40s, with slicked back hair and a stiff jaw, Rick had worked these flights for years. He liked things a certain way, clean, quiet, and orderly, and in his mind, Maya didn't look like someone who should be in seat 1A. "Ma'am," he said, his voice sharp now, "if you don't move, I'll have to call someone." The cabin had gone quiet. A few heads turned. A woman with pearl earrings in row 2 leaned closer, whispering to her husband. The businessman across the aisle frowned. Maya stayed seated. Her legs were crossed, her bag neatly tucked under the seat. "You can call whoever you like," she said. "I'm not moving." Rick's jaw tightened. "Were you refusing to follow my instructions?" "No," Maya replied. "I'm refusing to be treated like I don't belong." For a second, Rick didn't speak. He glanced around, realizing he had an audience. A young flight attendant behind him, barely more than a trainee, looked nervous but said nothing. Rick turned back to Maya. "Let me see your ticket." Maya slowly reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her phone, and handed it to him. Rick stared at the screen, blinked, then looked again. The ticket was there, first class, seat 1A. He handed the phone back, but his attitude didn't change. "You should have said something sooner," he muttered. Maya gave a small smile. "I did. You just didn't listen." Rick turned and walked off without a word. From across the aisle, the businessman leaned over. "That was something," he said softly. Maya looked at him. "It happens more than you think." The cabin buzzed with low whispers now. Maya leaned back into her seat and looked out the window. She had no interest in proving anything. But what Rick didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that this wasn't just any seat. And she wasn't just any passenger. She owned the plane. Rick didn't let it go. Though he said nothing more at first, his eyes kept landing on Maya every time he walked by. If another passenger asked for a drink, he smiled. If Maya so much as looked up, his face tightened. He was waiting for her to slip up. Maya stayed quiet, watching. She wasn't surprised. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated like she didn't belong. Not in stores, not at restaurants, and clearly not in first class. But this time, she wasn't just going to sit back. Rick returned with a tray of drinks. "Champagne?" he asked the couple in 1B and 2A. They took a glass each with warm thanks. He passed right by Maya without offering one. "Excuse me," Maya said, calm but firm. "May I have some water?" Rick didn't even look at her. "We'll get to you in a moment," he said flatly, and kept walking. The younger attendant, his name tag said Jason, paused nearby, eyes flicking toward Rick, then Maya. He looked uncomfortable, but didn't speak. A few rows behind, the whispering started again. Maya let out a slow breath and turned her head toward the window. She didn't need a drink. She needed patience. She was used to being underestimated, but today that mistake would cost someone more than just their pride. Another 5 minutes passed. Passengers were starting to settle in, pulling out books and tablets. Rick walked by again, and, as he passed Maya, she shifted slightly to adjust her leg. It barely moved into the aisle.
That's when it happened.
Rick turned too sharply, or maybe on purpose, and hit her foot with the edge of his shoe. The tray tilted. A full glass of sparkling water spilled right into Maya's lap. Gasps filled the cabin. Rick stepped back quickly. "Watch where you put your legs," he snapped. "You caused a mess." Maya looked down, water dripping off her pants. She didn't move at first. Then slowly she raised her head and locked eyes with him. "You walked into me," she said. "You were in the way." "No," Maya said, wiping her hands with a napkin. "You were." The businessman across from her leaned forward. "I saw the whole thing," he said. "You walked right into her." Rick ignored him. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. "If you keep causing problems, I'll have you removed." Maya sat still, water soaking through her slacks, her face unreadable. "I've been nothing but respectful," she said. "But you're the one making this a problem." Rick's face twisted. "You don't get to decide how this flight is run." "No," Maya said, "but I do decide how I'm treated." The room went quiet again. Jason stood frozen by the galley. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but Rick turned and shot him a glare. Jason backed away. Maya reached for her phone. Her hands moved calmly. She typed something, then set the phone face down on the armrest. Rick frowned. "What are you doing?" Maya looked at him, her voice still even. "You'll find out soon," he snorted. "Sure. Just don't cause more trouble, or we'll deal with it." Maya didn't answer. She didn't have to. The damage had been done, not to her clothes, but to Rick's future. He just didn't know it yet. The cabin buzzed with quiet energy. People weren't just watching, they were waiting. Rick moved up and down the aisle pretending nothing had happened, but his jaw was tight and his steps were quick. Every time he glanced at Maya, his lips pressed together like he was holding something in. Maya, meanwhile, sat quietly, staring straight ahead. The water had soaked through her slacks, but she didn't complain. She didn't call for help. She didn't even try to dry off. She didn't need to. Jason returned, tray in hand, and without looking at Rick, stopped at Maya's row. "Would you like some fresh water, ma'am?" he asked gently. Maya turned to him and gave a small nod. "Thank you." As she took the glass, their eyes met. Jason looked like he wanted to say more, but instead gave a tiny nod and moved on. From across the aisle, the businessman watched with a frown. He leaned slightly toward Maya. "I don't know what his problem is," he said in a low voice, "but you've handled it well." Maya smiled politely. "Some people think power means raising your voice." He raised an eyebrow. "And for you, power is being able to wait and still win." Rick passed by again. This time he stopped. "Is there a problem now?" he asked, looking at the businessman. "No," the man replied flatly. "But I suggest you treat her with the same respect you give everyone else." Rick scoffed and walked away. At that moment, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened." The mood in the plane was tense. Everyone felt it. Even the ones who tried to pretend they didn't notice were sneaking glances toward Maya's row. The nosy woman with pearls whispered, "She must be someone important." Her husband shrugged. "Or just doesn't want to back down." In the back, Jason stood by the passenger list. His fingers hovered over the names, and he looked toward the front where Maya sat. Then he made a decision. He picked up the intercom phone and whispered, "Captain, it's Jason. I think you should take a look at something before we're in the air." A few minutes later, the cockpit door opened, and the pilot stepped out. Everyone turned. He was tall, with gray hair and a serious face. He walked directly toward Rick. Rick stiffened. "Is something wrong, sir?" The pilot didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Maya, then turned back to Rick. "Step aside," he said. Rick blinked.
"What? You heard me."
Jason stepped forward and handed the pilot the manifest, the list of passengers. The captain scanned it, nodded once, and looked back at Maya. "Miss Carter," he said respectfully, "my apologies for the delay." Rick stared, confused. "Wait. What?" The pilot didn't look at him. "Miss Carter isn't just a passenger," he said. "She's the owner of this aircraft." The words hit like thunder. Gasps filled the cabin. Someone dropped a phone. The businessman leaned back in his seat with a slow, knowing smile. Maya finally stood. She smoothed out her blazer and faced Rick. "You treated me like a nobody," she said quietly. "But the truth is, You work for me. Rick's face turned red. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Maya turned to the pilot. Let's finish this flight. I'll deal with him after. The pilot nodded. Of course, Miss Carter. Rick stood frozen, his whole body stiff. The man who thought he ran the plane had just learned who really did. Rick didn't speak. He couldn't. The same man who had barked orders, rolled his eyes, and spilled water on Maya was now standing stiff in front of her, completely silent. For the first time since the plane had started boarding, his voice was gone. All around him, the passengers watched. Some shocked. Others quietly satisfied. A few even started whispering again. Only this time, it was different. She owns the plane. I knew something was off. She didn't even raise her voice. Maya turned back toward her seat and sat down gracefully. She wasn't smiling, and she wasn't gloating. She simply looked at Rick one last time and said, "You should have treated me like everyone else." The captain gave Rick a long, hard look. "Please return to the galley and wait there. We'll speak after landing." Rick hesitated. "But I didn't know." "Exactly," Maya said softly, cutting him off. "You didn't know, and you acted like you didn't need to know." The silence that followed was thick. Rick slowly turned and walked toward the back of the plane. Jason let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The captain looked at Maya. "Again, Miss Carter, my sincerest apologies." "Thank you," Maya said simply. The pilot returned to the cockpit. Jason stepped closer, unsure. "Miss Carter," he said softly. I wanted to say something earlier, but..." "You did enough," Maya said gently. "You spoke when it mattered." Jason gave a small nod and stepped away, his shoulders relaxing. The passengers were still quiet, but the energy had shifted. No more sideways glances or whispers about Maya being in the wrong seat. Now, they looked at her differently. With respect, even admiration. Across the aisle, the businessman smiled. "Well played," he said. "You let him show his true colors." Maya gave a small shrug. "I didn't have to do much. He did it all himself." The plane started to move, taxiing down the runway. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the engine's hum rising. As the jet lifted into the sky, Maya leaned back in her seat. Outside, the clouds drifted by. Inside, Rick sat in the galley, alone, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. But Maya wasn't thinking about him anymore. She had a meeting to attend, decisions to make, and an empire to run. This wasn't the first time someone had misjudged her, but it might be the last time someone dared to do it so loudly. The plane was cruising at 35,000 feet, smooth and steady. But down in the galley, Rick sat on a small fold-out seat, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. He had messed up. Badly. He replayed every moment in his head. The way he spoke to her, the drink he didn't offer, the water spill, the slap that never came, but almost did. And the phone, that phone she picked up like she already knew how this would go. Rick thought he had power because he wore a uniform. He thought he was in charge because he had authority. But now, he was sitting in the back of a plane, owned by the woman he disrespected, the one he didn't even think deserved to be there. Meanwhile, up front, Maya scrolled through her tablet, quietly checking reports. Her company had just acquired 2 more regional airlines last week. She was on her way to finalize another deal. She hadn't planned on making a scene. She hadn't planned on making an example out of Rick either. But sometimes the moment chooses you. Jason came by to check on her again. He brought a blanket, a fresh drink, and a soft affably in his eyes. She nodded in thanks. He hesitated. "Miss Carter, I know you probably have people who deal with this sort of thing, but if it means anything, I'd be happy to give a statement." Maya looked up. "Why would you do that?" "Because," he said, swallowing, "if I were in your seat, I'd want someone to speak up." Maya studied him. She saw the worry in his eyes, but also the honesty. "I appreciate that," she said. "You're a good man, Jason. Don't lose that trying to impress the wrong people." Jason gave a quick nod and stepped back, clearly relieved. A few rows back, The businessman looked up from his book and said to no one in particular, "You can tell a lot about someone by how they treat people they think are beneath them." Pearl Earrings Lady blushed. She hadn't said a word since the pilot's announcement. The energy in the cabin had fully changed. The nosy whispers stopped. People weren't staring at Maya anymore. They were watching Rick's empty spot at the front of the plane. Maya leaned her head back. The engine's hum was steady. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to relax just a little. But her phone buzzed. A text popped up from her assistant. "Legal team is ready. Want to handle this mid-flight or wait until landing?" Maya smiled slightly and typed, "Let's do both." She didn't need to make a scene. The scene had already made itself. Now it was time to handle things the way a real leader does. The plane moved smoothly through the sky, the cabin calm again, but underneath the silence, something was shifting. Maya picked up her phone and tapped a few times. A secure call connected. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said. "I'd like the crew file for Richard Nolan." "Yes." "The flight attendant. I'll explain more when we land. But go ahead and start a full incident report." She paused. "And let's flag him in the system for temporary suspension. Starting now." She hung up. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just sat back, folded her hands, and looked out the window. Behind her, whispers started again. Not about her, but about him. "Did you see how red his face got?" She didn't yell once. "That's what real power looks like. I wonder if he still has a job." Rick was still in the galley, pacing now. He kept glancing toward the aisle like he wanted to step out, say something, fix it. But he didn't dare. Jason walked in, holding a tablet. "Hey," he said quietly. "Captain wants you to stay back here till we land." Rick narrowed his eyes. "She's not gonna fire me. She can't." Jason raised a brow. "She owns the airline." "I didn't know that," Rick snapped. "Exactly," Jason said. "You didn't know. And you treated her like she was trash." Rick turned away, jaw clenched. "She set me up." "No," Jason said softly. "You did that all by yourself." Back in first class, Maya took off her blazer, folded it neatly on her lap. The businessman leaned across again. "I've seen a lot of people with money," he said. "But not many with this kind of control." Maya gave a tiny nod. "It's not about control," she said. "It's about not letting people think they can walk over you." The businessman nodded. "Well, you've made your point." Loud and clear. A soft chime came from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said over the speaker, "we'll be starting our descent shortly. Please return your seats to the upright position and fasten your seat belts." Maya sat up straight and opened her phone again. She tapped out one more message. "Arrange for someone from HR to meet me at the gate. He needs to be officially removed, publicly." She paused, then added, "Also, give Jason a raise. He's got a backbone." She hit send and slipped the phone back into her bag. Rick still hadn't shown his face. He wouldn't. And when the plane landed, he'd finally learned what it meant to face consequences. Not from someone yelling, not from someone losing control, but from someone who never had to raise their voice to be heard. The wheels touched down with a soft thump. The private jet rolled smoothly along the runway, slowing to a stop just beyond the main terminal. Outside, black SUV was already waiting at the foot of the stairs. Windows tinted, engine running. Inside the cabin, everyone was silent. Not because they were tired, but because they knew something was coming. Rick sat frozen in the galley. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. His hands were clasped tight, and his face was pale. He had spent the entire flight thinking about how fast things had turned, thinking about the moment Maya looked him in the eye and said, "You work for me." He had tried to tell himself it would blow over, that she wouldn't really follow through. But as he heard the stairs being lowered outside and saw the SUV pull up, that hope faded. Up front, Jason unlocked the door and looked at Maya. "They're here for you, Miss Carter." "Thank you," she said. She stood slowly, putting on her blazer again. Her movements were calm, steady. No drama, no rush. The businessman across the aisle gave her a nod of respect.
Whatever happens next, he said he earned it.
Maya gave a small smile. That's not up to me anymore. The truth is enough. She stepped toward the exit just as two staff members boarded the plane, both in dark suits with security badges around their necks. Behind them stood a tall woman in business attire, holding a folder. Her name tag read HR Manager. They didn't look at the passengers. They didn't say a word to Jason. They walked straight to the back. Rick looked up when he heard the footsteps. One of the security officers stopped in front of him. "Richard Nolan?" he asked. Rick nodded slowly. "You've been relieved of duty. Effective immediately. Please step off the plane." Rick's mouth opened. Wait, she didn't even. The HR manager stepped forward. "We'll be having a formal conversation after this. But this isn't a discussion. This is a decision." "You can't do this," Rick whispered. "You can't just end someone's job like this." Maya appeared in the aisle behind the security team, her presence quiet but commanding. "You ended your own job," she said. Rick stood, eyes wide, but didn't speak again. He walked off the plane with the HR team, his shoulders slumped, his pride trailing behind him like a broken suitcase. Back inside, the mood had shifted completely. Jason stared down the aisle at Maya, stunned. She turned to him. "You'll be getting a call from my office soon," she said. His eyes widened. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Maya said with a small smile. "You're being rewarded." Jason let out a breath and gave a small, stunned nod. Maya turned to the remaining passengers. "Thank you," she said, "for your patience." Nobody clapped, not yet. They were still too surprised. But a few people nodded. Some smiled. And one woman whispered, "That was the most respectful take-date I've ever seen." Maya walked down the steps toward her car. The driver opened the door. She got in without a word. But as the door closed, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. "Rick's already trending. Someone filmed the whole thing." Maya just looked out the window, calm as ever. She didn't need revenge. She had justice. And she didn't need to explain herself, because her actions already had. The black SUV pulled away from the plane and slipped onto the private road leading out of the airfield. Inside, Maya sat quietly, her phone resting in her hand. She wasn't thinking about Rick anymore. That part was done, handled. He'd have his meeting with HR, and whatever came next was between him and the system. A system he never thought would work against him. For years, Rick had probably thought he could say what he wanted, treat people how he pleased, and no one would ever call him out. But this time, he picked the wrong woman. Maya's phone buzzed again. A new video was making the rounds on social media, shot by one of the passengers in row 3. It showed the moment the pilot announced she was the owner of the plane, the moment Rick's face drained of color, and the moment Maya stood up calm, powerful, saying nothing more than, "You should have treated me like everyone else." Within hours, the video had over 2 million views. Respect is basic. Maya Carter. She owns the plane. They were trending worldwide. But Maya wasn't celebrating. She didn't want fame for standing up for herself. She just wanted people to stop assuming they knew who she was based on her skin, her outfit, or the seat she chose. Later that night, she sat in her office, the top floor of a tall building downtown. Floor-ceiling windows looked out over the city lights. Her team sat around a large table, going over press responses, legal paperwork, and flight crew reports. One of them asked, "Do you want to make a public statement?" Maya looked up from her laptop. "No," she said. "The video already spoke for me. But people are asking for you to say something." She thought for a moment, then stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the city. Finally, she spoke. "Okay. Just one sentence." She turned to her assistant. "Write this down. Respect isn't earned by looks and power isn't proven by shouting." Her assistant nodded. "That's it?" Maya gave a small smile. "That's all it takes." The next day, that sentence was everywhere. Printed in newspapers, shared on talk shows, quoted in classrooms and company meetings. A quiet woman who sat calmly in her seat had reminded the world that kindness is not a luxury, it's a basic expectation. Jason, the young flight attendant, was promoted a week later. Rick's name never returned to the schedule. And Maya, she took another flight. Same seat, same jet. But this time, when she walked on board, the crew didn't second-guess her. They stood up straight, they smiled, and they said, "Welcome back, Miss Carter." Not because they knew she was rich, not because they were scared of her title, but because now they knew better. And that's all Maya ever wanted. Not attention, not revenge, just respect. The kind that should be given freely. To everyone. Everywhere. Always.